welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and Giallo enthusiasts, as well as avid book readers. Episode 2 of Giallo Reads for the 1970 novel Cruising by Gerald Walker. So let's jump right into it. Uh, First up is chapter 4, John Lynch. Again, these chapters are just titled after whose point of view it is. So this is a interesting chapter. This is the first time that John Lynch is begun his assignment. You know, if this was the movie, you would have that scene where he's at home with his girlfriend, Nancy, I think it's her name, talking to her about what he's got to do, basically saying he can't tell her a lot. He doesn't know what's going to happen, doesn't know what kind of trouble he might be in. Um, None of that in the book because John Lynch doesn't have a girlfriend. So he goes right out. He is having coffee at a cafe in the area that he's supposed to be monitoring, and he's just complaining for the most part, complaining about how, you know, Edelson, that damn Jew, you know, is putting him up to this, making him dress all, you know, throwing out every homophobic slur and anti-Semitic slur that he can, complaining, being more racist about the area he's in and how there's all these Puerto Ricans. But so he's generally just complaining about the assignment, having to dress the way he is, being flirted at and looked at by certain people. There's a there's an interesting part where he's interesting. He's kind of like doesn't even understand how two guys go together. Like he's like, what do they even do? Like I can't even imagine it. Like just the idea of another guy like rubbing his bearded face on mine, like just it just doesn't do anything for me. And he's like, and I understand, like, you know, the act of penetrating, but like being penetrated, that's just doesn't make sense. It's just like, okay, dude, I get it. But yeah, and then he brings up this thing about how his uncle Phil used to do that, rub his beard on him. Um, there's some Uncle Phil stuff that comes up through the book, but again, you just get little pepperings of it throughout. So what else? He's on his new beat. He brings up a memory he has from being at one of the gay bars when he was in the army, talking about what you'd have to do to kind of get in, you know, or not get in, but get there. Like you either were just walking and then leaving. It's like you're either just gonna be walking back, or you kind of have to sweet talk someone to give you a ride, either being another officer, someone there, or you know, one of the patrons, one of the gay patrons. One of the things that we do get introduced to is the area where he's working, as well as the other officers, which coincide with encircling the area of where the four killings have occurred. So the killings are in both sides of town. None are below the village or above 86th, I believe that is, or 88th. I think that's 86th. So his territory is Columbus Circle to 86th Street, west side of Park to Riverside Drive. The territories overlap, and he wonders if he is ever going to be seeing another decoy. So that's another thing is that comes up early on here, and it kind of is pervasive through the book, is whenever he's looking at I almost said another gay man, but whenever he's looking at a gay man out in these areas, he's oftentimes wondering, I wonder if that's one of the decoys. I wonder if that's, someone like me. Um, he mentions 20 blocks of queers. So it's a big area of where these young gay men are congregating at nighttime in New York City. Huge area. And his beat, and he mentions how Edelson was pretty smart to make it so the territories would overlap, because if he didn't want them to just be like, okay, so yours ends at this street and that other person's ends at that street, because Edelson's theory was that if the fringes are just touching, then the likelihood that those officers or those those decoys are ever going to be actually at those fringes is going to be very slim, and that their killer might slip through those areas. And so he has is that they're overlapping. That way, the areas where they would have been fringes are kind of still deep within multiple officers' territories, and these are all coincidentally, or by design, I guess is the better way to say it, in the more populated areas. So Times Square, Columbus Circle, Broadway, and then another area which I forget. Not being a New York City, regular resident, I don't really know all these areas, but the more populated areas, the more busy, bustling areas are where the territories overlap. So the likelihood that there will be 2 or 3 decoys in the area, much higher. Very smart. As he's sitting there looking around, just being angry at all the delinquency, degeneracy, whatever that he sees this girl, and it starts like giving very graphic descriptions of like her body, her ass, the way she's dancing to the Puerto Rican music that's just blasting, and starts talking about how he's getting very aroused by this, and he's just kind of like, oh, like he's in an area that's just inundated with gay guys, and so he sees this one chick just kind of on the street, and he's instantly starts fantasizing about her and starts getting an erection. And then these 3 gay guys walk up to her, 2 white guys and a black guy, and he's then remarking about how they're so skinny, and like, oh, they have that like that like slim gay look to them, blah blah blah. And they're all kind of like close to her, and he comments wondering if she's this I forgot the term he uses for it, but it's like a woman that hangs out with a group of gay guys. There's a certain term that he uses for it, which again, I'm like, okay, never heard that before, but probably that was part of the jargon back then. Anyways, one of the gay guys like really pulls her in, and is like, they're like essentially grinding the way they're dancing, and he gets offended at this. Like he starts like balling a fist, and he's like, well, she seems to be okay with it, because she's not like disgusted, she's not pushing back, she's not doing anything, she's actually kind of going with it. And at a point he realizes, holy shit, this is not a chick, that is a guy. And he's been turned on by a guy this past like 5 minutes. And it's interesting on many levels. On one, it's just like I mean, one, it opens up John Lynch to this idea that, oh, he could get aroused by a guy, even though he's very much against this idea, but no, he's obviously not immune. And then what I think is also interesting is how it's written. I feel like whether this was the total conscious decision or a subconscious thing or what, but it seems like the same thing is supposed to be done to the reader. If you're a heterosexual man reading the book and you're visualizing everything as you're kind of expected to do with a book, especially if it's being descriptive, the way he's describing the things and the tight ass and how it's moving and this, that, it's like you're supposed to be, not like you're supposed to be getting aroused, but you're seeing the things that he's describing. You're like, okay, yeah, all right, cool. And then when he says that, it throws you for a loop. Obviously it's not as like potent and poignant if this was a movie, if this was an actual visual medium. But it's interesting. It's just an interesting thing. The end of the chapter, in the last couple pages after he makes that discovery, he makes a remark or a few remarks about how he kind of would like to be going around gay bashing. Like, it's not really explicitly said in that way, but he's kind of saying, like, if only, if someone was oh, I wish I could. Again, and the thing with John Lynch is it feels like he's trying too hard. So you start getting the comparisons, or you start drawing up these comparisons between John Lynch and Stuart Richards. Stuart Richards seems like he's opened himself a little bit to the idea of being gay or being bisexual, and but he's also violently opposed to it, which is clear from the last chapter with him. John Lynch, it seems like he's not giving into it in terms of it being a possibility, but it also seems like, I mean, both are very like trying to push back against it. Like with John Lynch, it feels like he's trying too hard, though. Well, I mean, to say that comparatively to the guy who's actually going out killing people, Stuart Richards, there's obviously more to him. It's I'm not going to say this in a way that that would insinuate that I'm blaming the presence of gay men in the city. And like, well, maybe if they weren't around, well, maybe if they weren't, flirting with him, well, maybe if they, because it's not their fault, obviously. This guy, Stuart Richards, has his problems are deeper than that. It's not just that he's, just this, might be this closeted gay man, and or he's homophobic. Like I think it's very evident that if he didn't have those things going on, he would be a killer still. He yeah, you get it early on in the book, and you get it throughout, that you can just tell there's something wrong with him. Now with John Lynch, he feels like a guy putting on airs, trying to be another bro, and trying to be like talking, at the bar with his pals about like, well, when these queers ever came to me, I'd punch him in the face. Maybe he would, but it seems like he's trying more so to convince himself, and it almost feels like he, like, the way he thinks feels like he's talking to someone. And that, again, like I said, like he's trying to convince them ultimately that there's no way that he could ever be like that. So very interesting. And as I've said with the book, with John Lynch, you versus in the movie, the character of Steve Burns, who's supposed to be the same character, there's way more insinuation that John Lynch actually might be gay, or he might have, he might be capable of fostering an attraction towards men, despite him being very odd in that section of life. A lot of people analyze him as being asexual. Essentially, he's not actively going out and seeking relations with women, even not like Stuart Richards is, who's got a harem. Anyways, that's the chapter with John Lynch first out, and it's pretty good. So moving on to the next chapter. Next chapter is the next Edelson notebook excerpt, and this is only like 3 pages. He is marveling at how he was able to pull this off. The fact that he was able to come up with this idea of, hey, give me so many guys I can put undercover to solve this, and it actually worked. And he kind of questions if he would have been able to pull this off in his prime when he was younger. He mentions how John Lynch was kind of the hardest person to get to agree to it, and he's kind of just being like a thorn in his ass. Other than that, very quick chapter. There's really not much to say. It just goes by really quick, and then he talks about how he's back to writing in this notebook, something he hasn't done in a while, and he's smoking a lot. That was something I neglected to mention early on in the earlier chapters when John Lynch goes in to meet Edelson, is that Edelson remarks that this is his third pack of cigarettes he's smoking that day. Yeah, that's kind of it. And then he mentions that if this assignment takes him down, he's taking these 10 guys down with him. And he says, it's gonna hurt you more than it hurts me. That's kind of it for the chapter. And then we come to chapter 6, Stuart Richards chapter. Ooh, this is an interesting one. This is about 30 plus pages. Stuart is leaving the cinema. He just finished watching The Third Man for what he believes is anywhere between the 5th or the 10th time. Okay. So yeah, I think he says also this is like his second or third movie that he watched today. He comments about leaving the theater. He still has the zither music in his head, which if you've seen The Third Man, the soundtrack is really memorable. And he remarks about like going from this very highly air conditioned room to out in the sweltering summer heat. He talks about some other movies. I'm just gonna read this off real quick. Oh, and before he does, he puts his hand on his pants. He kind of starts rubbing himself. Is he rubbing his privates or is he rubbing the knife? Not quite clear at the moment, although I'm going with the first one. So he's seen The Third Man. He remarks that it's the type of movie he really enjoys, which when he lists some of the other movies, it's this little bit of noir, a little bit of, well, I'll just go. So The Third Man, he mentions The Maltese Falcon, Laura, Double Indemnity, The Killing, The Asphalt Jungle, and Strangers on a Train. As he's leaving, he senses that he's being oogled at by these two gay black men. And he must be looking at them a certain way because they assume, or at least one of them assumes, that he's trying to hook up. And so one of them comes up to him and is kind of flirty, but not being too forward, but kind of sensing that there was an invitation. And so he's taking the invitation. He's trying to be like, hey, so, what'd you think about the movie? It's pretty warm day, but I mean, not too warm to, for some bodies to rub up. Anyways, he starts getting very like, F off, leave me alone, get away from me. He has this line that he repeats throughout the book, which I should have mentioned in the earlier chapter with him. He says, shut up, leave me alone, fuck you, a lot. And this is all in his head. So he's kind of trying to tell these guys off. He's more just being dismissive, but he even says, I wonder how they're perceiving me. And I think this is kind of funny because the first assumption is that they must see me as this like really cool white guy who's kind of like playing hard to get. It's like, yeah, sure, buddy. And then the other thing he assumes is he must come off as being very nervous, like he is gay and he is trying to set something up, but he's just too nervous and inexperienced with how to do it. And he assumes they must go with that because they keep trying. They're actually kind of like giving him something to work with. Also, when these guys are hitting on Stuart, he keeps trying his best to relive the moments of the movie, and to no avail. So I don't know, interesting coping mechanism. So he's trying to relive the parts of the movie, and his asthma keeps coming back. He's wheezing, he's having trouble breathing. So as much as he's trying to look like the tough guy, he knows he's coming off as weak. And eventually he just kind of explodes at them, drops the N-word, tells them to take their black queen asses somewhere else. I don't know, something like that. And you're just like, okay. And he says something else. He says all that. He says, get out of here before I call the cops and tell them why I blah blah blah. And they're immediately like, wow, okay. They start to leave, and they're just like, they make a retort to him because he was calling them, he was saying a lot of racial slurs and homophobic slurs, and they're like, better to be, with someone else than alone like you. So they go off. Then Stewart, who's been kind of standing at this haberdashery window the whole time when they, came up to him, he's now just like looking through the window, and he starts like rubbing the knife, and he remarks that rather than cooling his anger down, it's actually intensifying his anger, which he enjoys. Again, this goes to the quote he had said earlier about this feeling of oblivion and him just wanting to give into it. So he is recounting the killings. He mentions the first person, I think he calls him the Partridge. It's just being like very limp wrist. I'm assuming just, I don't know how else to put that. The way I read it is like it's his interpretation of someone who's just very stereotypically gay. Then he talks about, and this is all in one paragraph. Then he talks about the hustler. I don't remember if he gives him a name. I think he just calls him the hustler. And then the third person is Herbie, and he goes into details about Herbie, how Herbie probably struggled the worst, or his death was the worst. Herbie is someone he met at a gay bar. He walked in, was like really high, probably on, who knows? Honestly, I'm not even gonna guess. But he mentions that the guy was really high, saw him, kind of came over. They were then drinking, and he went back to Herbie's place. His roommate was gone. His roommate is, I believe, an actor. And there's a lot of the poetry of how he speaks about these things are really, really interesting. He refers to them both, himself and Herbie, as both owls. And there's some great owl stuff in there. He calls him, he says, horny owl meet thorny owl. He the percher, Herbie the purchaser. Okay, that's not bad. Beauty owl and fruity owl. Sipping together, Stewart still carefully on beer. The final swoop in the bedroom as Herbie is pulling the long-sleeved jersey over his head, the knife piercing his rib cage as the shirt clears Herbie's famished-looking eyes. Arms still tangled in the sleeves, a look of astonishment and the incredible smile on Herbie's face. He mentions this in that paragraph where he's talking about the 4 people he killed. Oh, and then he talks about Eric Alec, who probably fought the hardest, but Herbie died the worst. All of these people, beginning with, I think, the second person, he killed them, and they have this, like, obviously this fear and this astonishment. And then when they eventually succumb to the death, they kind of had a smile on their face, and the smile becomes something that he always goes back to when he's thinking of killing. Like, why the smile? What were they smiling about? Talks about himself being like this undiscovered or unknown species of owl, only revealed in the moment of the killing. Teasy owl meet easy owl, one with a mouse's heart, and see just how easy the other is in the machine-tooled cool air of this bloody mouse nest. That's the thing. Also, he refers to Herbie as believing himself to be an owl, but when the moment comes, he is nothing but a mouse. And then he kills him while he's taking his jersey off, and he's stuck in his clothes. That's when he actually goes in and starts stabbing him. And then he's talking to his dead body, or at least he's again, this is all in his head, so maybe he didn't actually say any of this stuff out loud. This is just what he's thinking. But he refers to himself, Stewart does, as Mother Stewart, and he's like chastising him. I actually will read this. This is pretty crazy. Herbie, what did you see in it all? Pay attention. Mother Stewart is talking. I'm telling you what I tell all my boys, my wonderful boys. Was it worth it? Owl got your tongue? Puny hunk of meat, a chicken neck without a bone. If you saw it in a butcher shop, would you buy it? Well, maybe you would. And he starts remarking about Herbie's penis. He like pulls his pants down and he's talking about like, well, this is what you wanted after all. And then there's a whole weird thing where he's like, well, he doesn't have, he's not, he's flaccid now because you would need blood in order for, and blood is something he is sorely lacking in this moment. And then, yeah, he is then just commenting on Herbie's penis and how, it looked like it was about to, but unfortunately, instead of he's gone. It's so hard to talk about this because I'm just like, if I had no fear of being like, like, oh, I can say this and nothing's gonna happen to the video, but it's like, it's such graphic content that it's like, yeah, this is probably gonna affect my ability to really freely upload this, whatever. Um, he's mocking Herbie. In fact, like, you probably sucked so many of these. Well, here, I bet you always wanted to, keep in mind, Herbie is the person who they found with his own junk stuffed in his mouth. Crazy. Another thing that's interesting, or at least I found this interesting, is he refers to, let me see if I can find it actually. It's a really interesting quote. But he refers to them all as his four fairies, which of course is, so much in this book is like I said, it's just like offensive. Four had waited for him so far. My Four Fairies, a movie title. This one would have a moral. Perversion doesn't pay. Well, then, a movie, but for an audience of one. Never mind the public arts. Give him the private arts anytime. That's where you find the true masterpieces of human ingenuity. He'd killed four, now, and who even suspected it? The only one who'd made the papers was Eric Alec, but in a small way, unconnected with the others. Of course, they dropped in the FA word, so that's why I. So he tells them off. He walks away from the haberdashery window, walks a little bit, then ends up at the window of another store. I can't remember what it is. It's ultimately not important. And he sees someone in the reflection watching him. And he describes him as like an older guy. I think he's like short, plump. Um, he he makes this comment like, we're everybody is someone's type or whatever. This guy's nobody's type, and he'll walk a few paces and stop, and the guy will then like walk to where he was at the window, and then he walks further, and the guy keeps following him and stops where he previously was. And they do this a little bit, the stop and go thing for a while, and then he gets to a stoplight, and the guy catches up with him. He's kind of out of breath, which fair enough, because Stewart is like still wheezing, still can't breathe correctly, and he knows this guy's trying to cruise him, and so he's like, "Hey, it's a nice night." Stewart's like, "I hadn't noticed," and the guy keeps trying to flirt, trying to be a little sly about it, not too forward or vulgar or anything. This is when Stewart notices that this guy has like an insanely disgusting mole, is the way he describes it, on his chin with like hair sticking out of it. And the guy kind of will be like rubbing his chin and like kind of covering it, but not totally. And Stewart's like, let me guess, you're here on business. Blah blah blah. You're wondering if maybe we could go get a drink, da 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 da, and then we would go out, and you would say, let's leave this place. I have a bottle of such and such up in my hotel room. Why don't we go up there? Blah blah blah. It'll be much cheaper, better private night. And the guy's like, yeah, pretty much. And he tells this guy off, is just saying like, essentially, you are the ugliest freaking person I've ever seen. You're not going to find anybody here who's going to want to go with you. And He walks away, leaves the guy speechless, and then finds this better looking young man and goes with him. And again, it's a very interesting the way it is phrased in his mind, where it's like this guy looks right, and then he kind of corrects himself and goes, well, I guess not. I guess he looks, insinuating that like this guy is about to be his fifth victim, so maybe he doesn't look right in terms of staying alive. Very interesting stuff. Like, Stuart Richards, I think, has the more interesting segments in the book in terms of just getting into the psychology of a killer. It's fascinating how he sees the world, how he justifies things. It's not fascinating like something to look up to. It's just crazy. I just need to make that clear, because everyone's going to try to twist what I'm saying. Not everyone, but I don't want to leave that open where it's like, oh, you admire him. It's like, no, it's like having a fascination in anybody who's a psychopath or is. Anyways, his sections of the book are the most interesting. And because he is the killer, it's always kind of fascinating to go down the rabbit hole with him. And I think that's all I've got for that. So those were the next coupling of 3 chapters, the trio, whatever. Join me next time and we'll go through the next John Lynch, Captain Edelson, and Stuart Richard chapters in Cruising. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time.